Well, it looks like we have over 20 people signed up. Some of the people will come on, so I think we'll just get started. So hello, everyone. Good afternoon and happy National Bike to Work Month. Thank you for joining us for our webinar on the ABCs of biking. That is gear, brakes, and chain. It must have and nice to have when riding, how to avoid crashes in traffic, some legislative updates on e-bikes, and more. My name is Julie Quinn, and joining me with today's webinar are Sophia Gallimore, Lexi Santiago, and Rachel DiMartino. This webinar has been brought to you by Transaction Action Associates, our private clients, and the Transportation Management Associations, or TMAs, that we manage. We are a full-service transportation company that offers commuting options, benefits, and services that promote green commutes. We also have a shuttle division delivering best-in-class transportation and charters. Our guest speaker today is MassBike's Executive Director, Galen Mook. Galen has been involved in MassBike since his days at Boston University when he co-founded the bicycle advocacy movement student group BU Bikes. Before joining MassBike, Galen worked at Landry's Bicycles in the advocacy and marketing department. He worked for the startup, the Hubway, which is now known as Blue Bikes. He founded a community bike co-op nonprofit in Alston called Common Wheels and has worked as a pedicabber and bicycle activist in the Boston area for over a decade. He especially enjoys teaching folks the basics of biking to break down barriers and get more folks riding to bikes more often. Today, Galen will talk about how to get your bike ready to ride in a few simple steps, and he'll also cover the latest news, laws, and infrastructure around e-bikes in Massachusetts. If you have questions, please submit them in the questions taskbar at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many questions as time allows. And this session will also be recorded. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Galen to give you our presentation on bikes. All yours, Galen.
Thanks, Julie. Appreciate it. Is it all right if I share my screen?
Please do, yes.
All right. Let me see, make sure you can see what I see. Once I get the view going. Apologies here. Let me get, cool. Am I full screen for everybody?
You are, that's perfect.
Perfect. All right. Well, welcome everyone. It is now Bike Month. The Bay State Bike Month is the month of May, which coincides with National Bike Month. And we are here now in Bike to Work Week. So I appreciate all of you and all of your interest in what's going on. As Julie mentioned, my name is Galen Mook. I'm the Executive Director of MassBike. We do the statewide work, which is legislation, policy, and all the rest. And today I have a very comprehensive yet scratching the surface presentation for you. And if you have any trouble hearing me, let me know, but I will fly right through what I have for you for slides. So for here in Bike Month, just want to highlight a couple of events. We have some rail trail ribbon cuttings and some group rides. This is actually from last year, but exemplary of what's going on around the state. And we have this great, awesome logo for Bay State Bike Month, which you can check out on our baystatebikemonth.org site as well. It kind of represents all the stuff that we have across the Commonwealth. I like to say from Pittsfield to P-Town, we've got bike stuff going. And why is it important that we bike? Let's start with that. For the most part, we're trying to tackle two of the biggest existential challenges in the Massachusetts Commonwealth, which is too much congestion on the roads and too much pollution in the air. We know that the transportation sector is the largest single source emitter of greenhouse gases. We actually updated the slide. It says 2014, but in 2019, it was still above 40%. And we know that we can tackle that immediately by getting more people out of automobiles and into biking, at least for a few trips. And then obviously that would have great impacts on clearing up our roadways and easing congestion for those who do need to drive. So let's focus on getting people out on two wheels. But generally, why I really appreciate biking, there's so many benefits to it on a personal level. Increased physical activity, there's better blood flow to the brain, the freedom, the independence of it, the idea of building community. This is just a few that I wanted to put down in bullets. So feel free to pop in the chat for reasons why you're on this webinar and some of the reasons why you like to think about biking. And I'm also interested, and I know we only have a brief 20 minutes of presentation, but if you want to throw in the chat what level of biking you're at, are you an everyday rider? Are you a casual rider? Do you like to go just biking with your friends to get ice cream? Whatever it is, I'm curious to know where people are starting from. And then to say that MassBike tries to reach folks on all levels And why I'm here and especially excited about what MassBike can do for Bike Month is we're trying to get people out to just ride for whatever reason, whether you want to do it for recreation, whether you want to do it for fitness, whether you want to do it for sport. We are arguably there's the low stress level that we're trying to focus on to get as many folks out feeling comfortable as possible. So this is a convoluted advocacy slide. I don't need to get into too much of it. So the idea with this slide is that there's definitely a type of bike to fit your body and to fit your purposes, whether it's a city bike, a mountain bike, a road bike, a fat bike, a folding bike, an e-bike, etc. Don't think that there's just one type. I also like to kind of make the analogy that bikes are like shoes. And sometimes you have your hiking boots, sometimes you have your dancing shoes, sometimes you have your stilettos. Different bikes can fit different needs for different purposes. And then to also say that everybody's got different sized feet. So don't think that the bike you're pulling off the shelf is going to fit you exactly. There may need to be modifications, different saddles, different sized handlebars. So feel free to work with your bike shop to find the need that fits why you're riding. One thing I definitely want to highlight, which is arguably a little bit more popular these days based on the price points coming down, are electric bicycles. All different types of bikes, generally, whether they're fat, folding, road, mountain, etc., can come in an e-bike form. And one of the reasons I want to highlight this is because the work that MassBike does is to get, again, as many people riding as possible on that low stress level. And we know that e-bikes really are barrier breakers to get people out riding who may otherwise have been prevented from hopping out for physical reasons, or the distance is too far, or the hills, or they don't want to get sweaty getting to work. So I want to really recommend for those of you who are thinking about kind of getting into the ease of biking, that electric assist bicycles are for you. Now, why it's important on advocacy is because we recently just passed e-bike codification, and that's classifications in this state that define e-bikes essentially as their own category. Before, they were more or less considered to be mopeds, which means they were not allowed on bike paths, not allowed in a lot of bike lanes, not allowed in incentive purchases for bicycling. But now that we've clarified that through MassBike's work in the legislature, with our partners and our allies in the State House, we have different classifications of e-bikes. I won't go into it too much, but I want you to know that there are classifications depending on the style of bike, whether it's a pedal assist or a throttle assist. As long as it's 20 miles an hour or below, and either a bicycle or a tricycle with operable pedals, they are considered essentially to have the same rights and responsibilities as anybody who is riding a regular bike, which means you are allowed to ride on the bike lanes, you are allowed to ride on bike paths, you are not allowed to ride on sidewalks, and that is specific to e-bikes. And then there are certain limitations on natural surface trails. It's a little more complicated than I wish it had to be, but this is the reality of where e-bike legislation lies, and that e-bikes are now their own classification. And this is important because this now means that you can go buy an e-bike and ride it as you would just like a normal bike. Take a quick pause there and say that e-bikes are awesome. And if you haven't ridden one, I recommend going to a bike shop and testing them out. All right, so we've got the bike. You got the bike to fit your need, whether it's electric or regular, you've got your bike. You need to get the good equipment. Now, there's the always, always, always basic equipment. You need a helmet, you need lights, and you need a strong lock. Now, with a helmet, anybody over the age of 16, you're not legally required to, but it's always a good idea. I have my helmet right here. This is my summer helmet. It's got a lot of ventilation. And the idea of why it's important to have a helmet is you only get one brain, and brains don't grow back. So please, please wear your helmet. Helmets are one-time use. That means if you're ever in a crash and you've hit your head, the helmet is compromised, you need to replace it. And you should also make sure that your helmet fits properly. When it's over the head, it should cover the forehead. You should be able to look up with your eyes and see it. You have this V that comes down under the ear. Then you have the buckle. I do the eyes, ears, mouth test to make sure that your helmet fits properly. And again, if your helmet has been compromised, you need to get a new one. For lights, you need a front light, which is white, and a rear light, which is red, just like any automobile would. And you need a strong U-lock to make sure that you are locking properly. This is the must have for equipment. Now, let's see if my slide moves, especially for locking, for those of you who are commuting, especially on bike to work day, go ahead and make sure that you are securing to a bike rack or something that is firmly affixed in the ground. This is very important to make sure your bike does not get nabbed by a thief that's out there. I highly recommend checking out the combination of cable locks for the wheels, along with a steel U-lock for the frame. And whatever you're locking to, give it a good shake to make sure that it is actually affixed in the ground and that is not a handicap access, not a fire escape, and does not block any pedestrian accessibility. I'll leave this picture up to say not everybody locks as good as they should. This is a rhetorical question. I'll just leave this one up that we've all seen why this is a bad locking job. All right. You've got your bike, you've got your equipment, you know where you're riding, you know where you're parking. You also have to make sure that your bike is in good condition. This is the ABCs of bike maintenance: air, brakes, and chain. These are your responsibility. You will need to make sure that you have air in the tires, that your brakes are nice and tight, and that you can do an emergency stop with both the front and the rear brake, and that your chain is in good condition where it's not gunky, it's not rusty, it's clean, it's lubricated, it can make the full motion and shift. And if it sounds like you're riding with a family of mice, you need to get your chain lubricated and cleaned, which is very easy to do with a small bottle of lube and a rag. Purchase it from a bike shop, and you can be good to go. There's a lot that I could talk about with the ABCs. We have done a whole hour-long webinar with Transaction on this, but knowing that we are in the interest of time, we're going to fly through this. Know the ABCs. And if you have any questions, you can also go to massbike.org or go to our YouTube channel at MassBike. We have an hour-long webinar on the ABCs in particular. But please, please check your tires every time before you ride. Check your brakes every time before you ride, and make sure that your chain is clean, because if it's rusty and you're riding, you can snap it. And if that's the case, you're walking home. So these are the must-dos every time before you ride to check the A, the B, and the C. You should also know your bike route. Now, I'm going to focus a little bit on Cambridge going forward because they've done a good job of rating their road system. But the idea of that roads have different stress levels, and you can find whatever stress level fits your need the best. But the idea of testing it out, not being too stressful when you're getting out there, finding a bike buddy will make your bike ride that much easier. Now, here's the city of Cambridge. You can find yourself, if you're riding through here, similar maps can be made for Somerville or Boston, or Waltham or Watertown and all the rest. But get an idea of which are the most stressful roads and the least stressful roads, and know that the stress levels change depending on the time of day, depending on the weather, depending on the traffic, depending on your own personal mood. Now, if I were to isolate just the lower stress roads in the city, you'll see that they don't really connect. Usually they're in the interiors, they're in the quieter streets. Sometimes they're in the streets that don't have any bike lanes or any bike infrastructure. So the idea of getting creative with your bike ride, staying off the main road, staying out of the business districts where the buses go and the trucks go and the Ubers are picking up people and the doors open up, might really help you really explore a little bit more of the city. And if you're just getting new to riding, to find the lower stress routes can really help you get from point A to point B in a little bit of a stress-free environment. And of course, I always recommend finding the separated multi-use paths, depending on where you're tuning in from in the Transaction universe. There's the Minuteman pathway, there's the pathway system on the Northern Strand Trail. If you're down on the Neponsit, there's the Neponsit Trail, there's the Charles River Trails. All of these are traffic-free multi-use trails, which arguably, in my opinion, how I build my bike route is starting with where the trails are and trying to find the interconnections. It may take some getting used to. If you go to massbike.org, our website, you can go to the resources tab. We have a map of the entire Commonwealth that shows you where all the multi-use paths are, where all the bike lanes are, courtesy of the MAPC, the Metro Area Planning Council. All right, let's round out with talking about traffic safety. So when you're out there riding, you need to consider yourself that you are basically driving a vehicle. Now, this is important because bicyclists have the same rules and the same responsibilities, but also the same rights to use the right-of-ways as all drivers. This is important legislation that MassBike has been pursuing for decades to really make sure that you are safe, but also legally protected when you are riding on the roads. But the only way that you can make sure that you are safe and protected is to follow the same laws that apply to when you are driving a vehicle. A nuance that was just passed into law, signed by Governor Baker on the second to last day of his office on January 2nd, is an act to reduce traffic fatalities, which defined vulnerable road users in the Commonwealth. This pertains not just to people riding bikes, but also people who are on foot, people who are in wheelchairs, workers who are on the roadside, but also motorists. And this is a law that changes how we are sharing our public space. So the gist of this very complex law, in about a 30-second spiel, is that by defining vulnerable road users, we have a category of classification of people who are out there on the public ways who are protected by law, but also protected by behavior of motorists. Motorists need to pass with 4 feet of space in order to be legally accurate. And we've made these cute little bumper stickers that mirror the signs that you will see up on the roads saying motorists have to give 4 feet of space in order to pass. This is not a new law in the country, but it is a new law for Massachusetts. We did not have this up until January 2nd, and it went into effect on April 2nd. Also, you should know that bicyclists have to have rear lights and front lights now. So white in front, red in rear. When before we were required just to have a rear reflector, now bicyclists have to have a rear light. However, it is a nuance where police officers cannot use it as a pretext to stop a bicyclist. So hopefully that will help mitigate any concerns around inequitable enforcement, which we know is a major concern out there. But the purpose is to make our roads safer. And the best way to do that is to be predictable when you're riding a bike and have reflectors and lights. Also, with the nuance of this law, side guards are going to be required on trucks that are owned or leased by the Commonwealth to prevent cyclists or pedestrians from getting rolled over if there is the event of a truck driver turning into the course of a vulnerable road user. Municipalities have now a clear course to lower speed limits, and we have standardized crash reporting across the Commonwealth. It's a very dense law, but it's new, and this has been something that MassBike has been pursuing for a decade, and we finally got codified, and we're very proud of this. This is now going to be a permanent change in the state on how we treat ourselves on our roads. Getting to the end of the webinar, though, I do want to talk about some practicalities. I'm going to spend about 2 minutes on this and get up to the Q&A because I know we have some questions in the chat. But a couple of ways to avoid major crashes out there. First off, the best way to treat yourself appropriate out there is to be predictable and follow all the same rules and responsibilities as all road users, which means stopping at lights, yielding to pedestrians, signaling when applicable, and just basically treating yourself as a vehicle driver when you are sharing the roads in mixed traffic. Some major tips to keep in mind, though, is 1, go with traffic, not against traffic, because drivers are going to be expecting you to be participating in the same direction as all drivers. You will have to avoid the door zone, which means give yourself about 3 to 4 feet of distance away from parked cars, even if that means riding on the far edge of a bike lane or even in the travel lane. You are more predictable when you are riding straight and not having to swerve, and arguably, it is illegal for anybody to open a door and strike somebody, but that doesn't prevent it from happening. So just make sure that if a door opens up, you are not in the path of getting taken out by that door. Also, please avoid the right hook. And I don't mean to say that this is a victim blaming cyclist responsibility, but this is the reality that if you are ever approaching an intersection, drivers don't always look to the right in their blind spots to see if there's a cyclist next to them. So the safest way to be is actually in the line of traffic and not parallel to traffic when you are approaching an intersection. So that if I was the cyclist, what I would do is merge in between the beige car and that blue car and really be in the line of travel, not next to the traffic, in order to be visible and prevent myself from getting in that right hook situation. Especially important when you're around a large truck, bus, a garbage truck, a tractor trailer, because the blind spots are so massive on those large vehicles, and that is one of the primary leading causes of fatal crashes. And lastly, ways to think about maneuvering in a bike on a left turn. It really is up to you. You have the right to do it as a motorist would, which is to merge in the left lane and turn left when it's clear. But I would also recommend the middle, which is a 2-stage left, also known as a box turn, where you're really going straight, hanging out, waiting for the light cycle to change and going straight again. So you're not actually crossing through and crossing moving traffic. I highly recommend thinking of this on tricky intersections And if it's ever tricky, you can always hop off your bike and become a pedestrian, have the full rights and responsibilities of walking your bike in a crosswalk. It's much, much safer if you're ever feeling that you are in a compromised situation to please just do what you can to get yourself out of that situation. Regardless of what the law tells you, responsibility of safety is in your hands, and make sure that you are doing whatever is in your power to be as safe as possible, because it is really the most important thing is making sure that you are safe. That was a very brief overview. I have so much more we can talk about with all of this. So please, please keep in touch. My email is right here. You can check out massbike.org. We have so much going on with Transaction. I'm really grateful to have the opportunity. And please check out some of the great work that's going on both at Transaction and e-commuter stuff, and also at baystatebikemonth.org to celebrate Bike Month, because keep in mind that we've got 2 more weeks left going on here. Bike to Work Week is happening this week. Bike to Work Friday is happening this Friday. So I'll hope to see some of you out there, maybe at Boston City Hall, or some of the work that we've got going here. And with that, I know we only have a few minutes left, but Sophia, I'll pass it back to you. And I'm happy to stick around and answer some Q&A.
Okay, good. Thank you, Galen. So let's see, is there any news on the implementation details of the Massachusetts e-bike rebate law that was passed last year? I know we are waiting on Massachusetts to provide this.
I love that question. That's a great question. So the answer lies with the administration. They need to plug it into their budget. What we were able to get passed last year was a designation that the Department of Energy and Environmental Resources is tasked with creating a program, but that didn't necessarily fund the program. As I understand it, the DOER, Department of Energy and Resources, is figuring out what that program is going to look like, and they haven't done that yet. They're in process. We have a new administration, we have new secretaries, we have new programs. So there is an ongoing conversation. I would ask that any of you who are interested in this to contact your legislator, your state rep, your state senator, to make sure that if it's not included in this year's budget, it's included in next year's budget. We're asking for about $10 million, which would put us on par with Connecticut or Colorado. It's not infeasible that that could just be programmed by the administration. They already have a lot of money in the electric vehicle program that could easily be put into this without any added legislation. So there's a couple of ways this to go, but really it comes down to the Healy-Driscoll administration plugging it in and making those dollars available. So it's a work in progress, but I think what we were able to get in the legislature last year was that both the House and the Senate said green light on starting the program, but now we have to get the money into funding the program. So it's a work in progress. What I've heard is that we're looking at 2024, and I've got my eyes set on 2024. So we're continuing the work.
Thank you, Galen. So what do you think about purpose-made e-bikes versus the conversion kits?
Oh, great question. Conversion kits can be fine if you're so mechanically inclined, but I personally trust a local bike shop because they have warranty, they have the ability to replace a battery if there's a failure, and there's basically reliability behind it. Now, that might be an added cost, which again is why we're doing the e-bike rebate program as well. But my personal take is do it from a reputable source. And whether that's a conversion kit that's a reputable source, that's great. But if you're just ordering something off Amazon or from a Chinese company that you don't know, if there's a failure, you have no one to go back to try to get any recourse. And one of the biggest dangers that we're seeing, not really in Massachusetts, but definitely in New York City, is that e-bike batteries and e-bike chargers might not be compatible. And there have been lithium fire batteries, which is a major, major source of danger, because if you're charging your bike at home from an incompatible charger, that could be a major problem. So this is why I would recommend just going with a local reputable source, which could be a shop or at least a certified seller, so that you have somebody to fall back on.
Okay, thank you. Can you recommend an app for bike navigation, or are there online?
Great question.
Apps?
Yeah, there's a few out there. I don't actually personally use one. Strava's not too bad. I don't know if e-commuters got anything that would be a suggestion of just like lower source, but or low stress. But my idea is really I just use Google, frankly, or I talk to a bike buddy. There's biking groups that are out there that really are the best source of knowing where the cul-de-sacs cut through, or knowing where this park ends and that park starts. So I wish I had a better option, but also going to massbike.org under our resources page, you can get the map of where all the bike lanes are. and kind of basing your route off the bike lanes and the bike shared use pathways.
Okay, thank you for that, Galen. And you are correct. There are bike paths and bike trails and things within eCommuter as well. And that's ecommuter.org. Okay. Unlike a car, which has mirrors, how do you keep track of your blind spots when riding on road?
Oh, great question. If we were doing an on-bike drill, I would have us all practice holding our handlebars and looking behind us while riding straight. Using your peripheral vision is the best way to do that. Some people have mirrors that they put either on their helmet or on their bike itself, but mirrors have blind spots. So you do have to get comfortable with the physical nature of being able to turn and look. That's really the only way that I would really trust being able to really know what's coming up from behind you. Also, ears. Your ears will tell you when traffic is coming, which is why do not ride with earplugs or earbuds, because this is arguably my best sense of knowing when a traffic is approaching.
Okay. This is not a question, just a statement. A lot of the new bike lanes make it hard to merge into traffic.
I feel, yeah, that's very true. And I think the idea of working with municipalities to modify bike lanes, just because a bike lane is down, it will always be added, changed. It's an evolution that the states are going through right now to kind of perfect some of the bike infrastructure. And it doesn't connect on a single road or a single route. You can have multitude of different bike pathways, from a share road to a protected bike lane. So I would say, give that feedback up to the local transportation department based on whatever municipality it's in, so that they can do better going forward. And I agree, it's a challenge out there.
Can you talk a little bit about which trails are safe for hybrid bikes? I don't think you talked about that in your presentation.
Oh yeah, good question. So hybrid bikes, as I understand them, are kind of a mix between like a road bike and a mountain bike. Medium-sized tires used for going about 5 miles, 10 miles, nothing too long distance. I mean, you can go 50 miles if you want, but they're not really made for efficiency. They're really made for toting around, which is great. I'd say any railed trail is appropriate. Any road would also be appropriate as long as you're comfortable in traffic. But I would think that hybrid bikes go a little bit slower in terms of their energy transfer than a road bike. So you're maxing out at maybe 12 to 15 miles an hour, as opposed to a road bike that can go 20 to 25 miles an hour, a little bit more easier. So finding slower streets, finding streets that are a little bit more in the neighborhoods might be more appropriate. And any rail trail, even if they're gravel, can probably handle hybrid tires. So it doesn't even have to be paved. But hybrid bikes really are designed to kind of do everything, except for maybe like going over roots and rocks and trees that would really require suspension like a mountain bike. But I love hybrid bikes because they really are kind of the all-purpose style bike.
Okay. Can you talk to us a little bit more about the e-bike rebate program?
Yeah, so the e-bike rebate program, it's an idea of, we do rebates for electric vehicles, right? So the state will give retailers money back that gets passed on to the customer of a certain percentage. And on e-vehicles, like cars, they're pretty sizable. I think it's about 8,000 or something like that. What we're seeking on e-bikes, it's between $500 and $750 back at a point of sale. So if you're trying to purchase an e-bike from a retailer and it's a $2,000 bike, that might be out of reach for a lot of folks, especially low-income folks who are dependent on a vehicle that don't have good transit access. So we're hoping to lower that barrier. We think that e-bikes are e-vehicles and can replace automobile trips. There are also benefits just by all means of just getting out and riding. So the goal is to kind of encourage the climate dollars that are going towards electric vehicles to also be incorporated into e-bikes just the same. We know that the cost benefit analysis is there. If we start to replace car trips with e-bike trips, it's all dividends on the return on investment. It will help alleviate some of the concerns on our public transit system and will help alleviate congestion on the roadways. So the goal is that it's really about dollars spent. And if we're going to be incentivizing people to get out of cars, we should also be incorporating that into rebates for bicycling as well.
Absolutely. I only have 2 more questions for you.
I'm here.
Okay. Is it a requirement that e-bikes only apply power to the wheels when the rider is pedaling?
Oh, great. So I know I breezed through that slide, but that's why there's 2 classifications that were put into state law. The first is you have to be pedaling in order for the motor. That's class 1. And the second class is that you don't have to be pedaling and there can be a throttle. So it depends on the type of bike that you have, is whatever classification that bike is. And the reason for those classifications are because there may be differences in regulations. There might be pathways that have class 1s allowed, but not class 2s. Although we haven't seen that yet in Massachusetts, we have seen that elsewhere in the country. And there might be things like maybe the e-bike rebate will apply to class 1s, if not class 2s, or maybe different tiers. So we've opened up the potential for the 2 different classes because that's how the industry has built the e-bikes that you can go and purchase. It's a national standard. And I should also add as a tangent, or not a tangent, but additional information, federally, there's even a 3rd class, which are bicycles that go up to 28 miles an hour, but we haven't put those in state law yet. But they are federally designated as class 3 e-bikes, which means they're not mopeds. They don't need RMV classifications. They're not motor vehicles. They are class 3 electric bicycles, but technically those are not at Massachusetts level. We only stick with the class 1s and class 2s, which top out at 20 miles an hour. And again, the difference is whether you're pedaling with the motor or whether you have a throttle that you can have the motor going.
Okay. I think you've talked about this one, but what is an average cost of e-bikes, and does the state provide an incentive to buy?
Yeah, so they don't yet, except for small pilot programs that are happening, which we're participating in the city of Worcester, but it's not scaled up to a state level yet. But typical e-bikes, I would say the price points are coming down. You can actually go to a box store like a Walmart or a Target and find an e-bike for about $800 or $900. However, the quality of those bikes is arguably a little poorer, and you're going to have that break on you, and you're going to spend more money on maintenance. I would say that the most basic entry-level e-bike is around $2,000, all included, all the way up to maybe $7,000 or $8,000 if you get like the kind of the bucket bikes that you're seeing the families putting their kids in and riding around Somerville. It really does come down to quality of the frame, the weight, and the quality of the motor. But the price points are coming down dramatically, basically because the technology is getting better. But it's still out of reach for a lot of folks. Like I really don't have the money to get an e-bike. I don't ride one. I would benefit from the e-bike rebate for sure. And the idea of making it that you are incentivized to bike in whatever mode, whether it's through infrastructure of bike trails or accessibility of purchasing a bike, or maybe it's an incentive to commute in and you get a tax rebate from your employer. All of these things add up to just encouraging more people to ride, which is why we are leaning pretty hard into the e-bike conversation as well.
Okay, I got one more for you.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, in Massachusetts, is there any rules and regulations about riding any bike path if there is no signage available?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, for e-bikes, we put in the law that you are allowed on bicycle pathways if you are a class 1 and class 2 e-bike. You are allowed. However, jurisdictions can prohibit. They just have to do so with a public process and they have to sign it. So if there is no signage, you are allowed. Now, you probably are not allowed to ride 20 miles an hour because that would be considered reckless, and you are prohibited from riding recklessly. So ride safely, ride slowly, but you are by statute allowed to ride bike paths because that's how we wrote the law and that's how it was passed last year.
Okay, I think that's it. I'm going to turn it back over to Julie.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Galen, thank you again. You're amazing with your information and everything that you know. So thank you all for joining us. Again, my name is Julie Quinn. If you have any questions or comments about today's bike webinar or any transportation questions, you can reply to our follow-up email and your transportation program manager will contact you. If you want any more information about MassBike or anything that Galen talked about, you can check out his website at massbike.org. And remember, you can log your trips and you can find bike path information on ecommuter.org as well. So happy riding, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks.
Thank you.